So now I'm happy to introduce to you our esteemed panel. Thank you all for joining us here tonight at St. Peter's Church at this event, Elevating the Sacred, Materiality, and Spiritual Art, hosted by the Arts and Architecture Conservancy at St. Peter's. Thank you. We're here to honor the closing of the show, Audrey Anastasi, Stations of the Cross. It's been amazing. My name is Jacqueline Lewis. I work here. And it's been amazing to come in and see these works every day. They've been here for the last few months and have accompanied all of us on, the last few months here. So thank you so much. I'm going to start by introducing our moderator for tonight's panel. This is Jared Stahler. He's the senior pastor at St. Peter's Church. He's interested in the interface of religion and society and pays particular attention to the voices or viewpoints of persons placed by the powerful at the margins of church and society. Pastor Stahler is a leader in numerous church-related organizations and has served on the boards of and has been a consultant for a number of secular not-for-profit organizations. He serves as a co-chair of a Partnership of Faith in NYC, a network of senior religious leaders of city's Jewish, Muslim, and Christian communities. Pastor Stahler is also the executive director of the Arts and Architecture Conservancy at St. Peter's, a secular non-for-profit organization. Promoting classical, folk, jazz music, theater, dance, and the visual arts, the Conservancy fosters community engagement, preserves modernist art and architecture, and ensures a vibrant future for the landmark St. Peter's Church at City Corp Center. Our panelist at the end is Pastor Khader Khalia, panelist. Pastor Khader Khalia was born and raised in Bethlehem, Palestine, the very town where Jesus was born. He was baptized and nurtured in the Greek Orthodox tradition, where he was shaped by the richness of ancient liturgy and sacramental life. Over time, he was drawn to Lutheran theology, particularly its evangelical Catholic expression, grounded in the Word, the sacraments, and the theology of the cross. He attended Talitha Kumi Lutheran School and earned a bachelor's degree in biblical studies and Christian education from Bethlehem Bible College. In 2005, he was invited by the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America to continue his theological education. He received his Master's of Divinity from the Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary in Berkeley, California, and was ordained into the ministry of the Word and Sacrament in January 2009. Pastor Khader first served as associate pastor of St. Andrew's Lutheran Church in San Mateo, California. In October 2013, he was called to serve as pastor of Redeemer St. John's Lutheran Church in Brooklyn, where he continues to lead the congregation in worship, preaching, and community ministry with joy and dedication. Thank you for joining us today, Khader. Our next panelist is Karen Zukowski. Karen Zukowski is someone I've been very grateful to work with. She is the scholar on all things Nevelson. She is also an independent historian who writes and consults on topics in American visual culture, especially homes and other immersive environments. She holds a PhD from the Graduate Center of City University of New York City with a dissertation on late 19th century artist studios. She has been the curator of Olana State Historic Site and a board member of the Olana Partnership. She is on the advisory council for the Historic Artists Homes and Studios program of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, on the board of the WASEC Project, a community-based contemporary arts organization, and chairs a committee overseeing the restoration of Errol Becker Chapel of the Good Shepherd in St. Peter's Lutheran Church in Manhattan. She is the author of Radiant Livingness, the Nevelson Chapel at St. Peter's Church, and Religion in the Arts, which examines the spirituality infused in the chapel through the collaboration of Louise Nevelson and her patron, the Reverend Ralph Pearson. We also have Audrey Anastasi, whose bio I do not have in my hand at this moment, but I would love to read it and share it with all of you later after the panel. Here is Jared.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Thanks to these wonderful panelists, and a special thanks to Audrey. We shared recently that our connection goes back to the days not too long after September 11. Many people know that Audrey has a gallery, a very important gallery in Brooklyn. We have two Brooklynites on the panel, others hopefully from Brooklyn in the audience. Here you go, Brooklyn is representing tonight. I remember coming out to the gallery to pick up a piece of art that I wanted at an auction for a fundraiser for Lutheran Medical Center. And I think you had just started, or were maybe I saw one of these, I can't quite remember the timing. And then you sent us a note in the mail at least a year or so ago with a copy of the book, and there are some books printed, some of these, and you've actually, these are the originals, taken, printed as a book, made some tiles, there are various applications of them now. What I didn't realize when I was paging through the book and even seeing these is what I've come to learn afterwards, is that you've done all of these with your non-dominant hand, with your left hand. And I'm really curious if you could speak to that for a moment. Why did you choose to do that? What does it bring to the work itself? It's just a really curious choice for an artist.
Well, hi. So, hello everybody. Thank you for being here, and thank you for not only putting this work up, which is very exciting for me, but for arranging this tonight. So we get right into it there.
Yeah.
So
dive in.
So it's a funny thing to talk about because I don't want it to be like a circus trick, so to speak. But I'm a very precise artist. I have that connection, whatever the hand-eye coordination. And I experimented occasionally with using my non-dominant hand when I felt like I was getting too fussy, kind of. So I was teaching at Parsons School of Design, young people, like high school students working on their portfolios. They had a class for them. And I used to encourage the students to try this as an exercise, working with their non-dominant hand. And it was very interesting how freed up people became. So I kind of had the feeling that if I was having students do it, I should know what it feels like. And it's really frustrating. Your right hand wants to just take that paintbrush or that stick of charcoal out of your left hand and get it done. But I kind of stuck through it, and the thing that happened almost immediately for me is that I saw a freshness, I'm gonna use the word a soulfulness, and I just felt like so excited to start working all over again that I had kind of bypassed all of that. I'm going to use the word cosmetizing, making perfect, making pretty, making, something that people are going to say, oh, wow, you can do that so carefully. And just kind of getting to the heart of the matter. And along with using my non-dominant hand, I use a few techniques where I'm working really quickly. And it makes me feel like I'm connecting, and visually you can see it, I'm connecting with the more intuitive side of the brain. So I could go on talking about this for a long time, but we'll stop there for a moment. Yeah.
I'm curious, Karen, are you aware of any of these kinds of disciplines that Audrey is talking about that lead to freshness in Nevelson's working techniques?
I think so. Nevelson, we know from a documentary film, she worked very quickly, and she worked by kind of improvising. She moved things around and put things together, even when she was directing whole crews of people to move big steel plates around. And she said explicitly that by working quickly, she could connect to her subconscious, her unconscious, and that it was a way of just freeing her up, I think, in the same way that you're talking about.
This subject matter, Audrey, is probably some of the most, I imagine, artistic. I have no study to point to. I kind of feel like the current Secretary of Health and Human Services. But I imagine that this is one of the most painted or depicted artistic scenes. And I'm curious, with this sort of technique and coming to this, Audrey, what was this like as you were going from scene to scene to scene with this kind of technique, this discipline that so beautifully, as you said, sort of opened up other possibilities for you?
Well, that's a good question. And again, that's getting right into it. So I had always wanted to do a series of the Stations of the Cross. So is there anybody in the room who doesn't know what they are in general? Okay. I come from a Jewish background. So my husband is Catholic. And especially on Good Friday, we would go to different churches, visit a few different churches, and walk the Stations of the Cross and see these particular 14 moments in the time from when Jesus was condemned to when he was laid in the tomb. And mostly they're very didactic. And I think that's the purpose of it, was to teach people the story. And a couple of things were happening in my life that made me think about betrayal. And I felt like this is the time to do them. And what I did at the time was I kind of printed out exactly what the stations were, but I didn't want any images. And I think this might be the very first time, because I'm mostly an observational artist. I like to look at something and put it down and capture the character of it. This I was doing out of my head, but I was doing it very physically. Like I would imagine what it felt like to have that weight of the cross, or to be mocked, or to have somebody pulling your garments off, the humiliation. And the story for me, and I want to be respectful of people that are literalists about it, but for me, it's a story of dignity in the face of betrayal, in the face of hurt. And it was important for me to do this in a way that was emotional. And that's really what I tried to do with these. And in the approach, I did paint on this gold leaf with my left hand, and I had a wet paper towel in my right, so I could be very spontaneous if something was really going where I didn't want it. And then in retrospect, this may be of interest to you, is that I looked at images later of yes. And so this actually happened in narrow stone streets, but in my head, I've kind of got it all happening, playing out in open space. So that's, I guess, another sort of aspect of trying to stick with the essential and the emotional side of it, as opposed to telling the story exactly the same way it's been told.
Maybe this is a way to open up the conversation and bring our Palestinian colleague in. Pastor Khader, growing up in Bethlehem, just miles from Jerusalem, where the Via Dolorosa is. And so for folks to know some of the history of the stations, this becomes a practice that we know was established fairly early on in Jerusalem, and Emperor Constantine's mother goes to Jerusalem on a famous pilgrimage, and she writes down in her journal and in letters what she experienced there. And so much of what spreads throughout Christianity in terms of keeping of Holy Week and the 3 days and Easter comes from her experience of the very land in which this happened, the very place, and then these stations emerge as well in Jerusalem and start to spread mostly because of her visit there. And to this very day, you can take the journey on the stations all throughout Jerusalem. Khader, would you tell us a little bit about what that's like, traveling, doing the journey of the stations, and how are they kept by Jerusalemites and others today?
People do it during Holy Week and Lent, but also they do it every time, especially pilgrimage who travel to the Holy Land. They do it each time they travel to the Holy Land. So last time I took a group to the Holy Land in 2023. We walked the way, the Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering, the 14th station that Jesus walked on his way to Golgotha. And it is very emotional to walk them. To walk each station, to say a prayer, to remember what happened at each station, and we know what happened at the end. He was crucified, and but for for me, growing up in the Holy Land, Station of the Cross weren't just something we did as a Palestinian during Holy Week. They were the streets we lived on. I remember walking the Via Dolorosa as a kid, the same roads where Jesus carried his cross. And even back then, I could feel something, the weight, not just history, but the weight of now, the suffering that's happening, taking place in the Holy Land. And these stations are always been real, because as a Palestinian, we live them each and every single day. Here is something happened. I still remember being a 10-year-old crossing a checkpoint in my way to school with a soldier deciding whether I could pass or not. That moment, that fear, that powerlessness, that humiliation, that is to me is station number one. Jesus is condemned. And the more I think about it, I don't need to be politically correct here, but we know Jesus was a Palestinian Jew. He was born under occupation. He was born under the empire. He was pushed. He suffered. He was one of us. So when we walk the stations, we are not just remembering him and what happened 2,000 years ago in Jerusalem. We are walking with someone who already walked our road, who knows what it is like. So when Jesus carries his cross, and station number 2, I think of every Palestinian parent trying to carry the weight of survival. The third station, Jesus falls. This is station number 3. And I see Gaza today, crushed, cut off, people just trying to breathe under siege. Station 7, this is the second fall of Jesus. That's every house and hospital and school turned to rubble. Every olive tree uprooted from the ground. Every family told to start over again. And station 9, it is the third fall. And that is when you are already broken and still more is taken from you. That's when hope itself fails. But the 14 stations you are seeing and we are discussing today, there is something also unique about them. They are not all about pain. It's as you said, it's about showing up. It's about love. I love station number 5. And station number 5, Simon of Cyrene helped carry the cross. And I think of the allies, the ones who stand with us, Muslims, Christians, Jews, people with no religion at all, who say, no, this isn't okay, and help carry the weight, even when it costs them something. And then station number 6, Veronica wipes Jesus' face. That's every Palestinian mom covering her kid's eye during a raid. That's every neighbor who share food or water in the middle of chaos. And to me, this is love, it is solidarity, and it keeps us going. And then when Jesus meets that image, when Jesus meets the woman of Jerusalem, and this is station number 8, I hear the mothers in Gaza crying out for their children. But those cries aren't just grief, they are strength, because Palestinian women, like Mary, they are the ones holding everything together when the world is falling apart. And then station number 10, Jesus is stripped. That is what occupation does. Tries to humiliate you, strip you down, make you feel small, but even in that, there is dignity. And then station 13, Jesus is taken down from the cross. And that is the moment after death. with all the noise has stopped and all that is left is the body, that is every family who had to carry their son home, who had to bury their child, who had to clean blood off the street and go on. That silence, we know it too well. And then the 14th station, Jesus is laid in the tomb, in the sepulchre. And that is where the world thinks the story ends. But we know better, because as people, we have been buried over and over, buried by war, buried by silence, and yet we rise, we plant new olive trees, we rebuild, we keep singing, keep resisting, keep believing that love is not finished. So if you look at what's happening now in the Holy Land, the Via Dolorosa is empty. There is no people going there. The shops are closed. And people are searching for hope. And hope is something we do, something we create. And as we look at Jesus' images here in the stations, we see that at the end, resurrection is the final answer for us.
The power of these images, especially because they're not literal, to be able to hold so much and to be able to relate so powerfully to today, the present, is really striking. And I'm curious, maybe either Audrey or Karen, if you want to field this question, and maybe perhaps reflect either on this work or Nevelson's work or any work in general, on this question of the power of art to hold something specific and something broad, something local and something somewhere else. Audrey, you do that so powerfully here. We know Nevelson does that so powerfully. So I don't know if the two of you...
Well, I want to tell you that was so beautiful. And one of the things about doing this series is how, I hate to sound like a cliche, but how humbling it is. You know, here we are, we're sitting here, we're comfortable, and you are interpreting this through like one of the world's hugest tragedies, you know, that is imaginable and is ongoing and, you know, is kind of, like I say, imaginable, unimaginable. It's so difficult. So once again, you know, who am I? I'm an artist who uses my left hand, and I try to make the work emotional, but you've put it in that context, that human, and that context of love, of the point of religion, of connecting, of caring for your fellow man, woman, child. So I'm going to use a Yiddish word, I'm verklempt. I mean, I'm really on the verge of tears because, you know, of course as an artist, that's what you want to do. You want to connect. And you want art to do something in terms of connecting what's common in people, you know, the emotions. You know, I talked about betrayal, but, you know, what about love? What about caring? What about, you know, the tender moment that someone's trying to comfort? So I don't even know your question. I just went crazy on that.
I think you've answered it.
To try to bring this specifically to the chapel, you spoke about how this, the crucifixion and laying in the tomb is not the end. It's just the beginning, because Christ is risen again, and again, and again, and again. And Ralph Peterson and Louise Nevelson wanted to make this chapel, is one part of a church that's all about urban ministry, and it was created at a time when Ford said to New York, drop dead. And Ralph turned to Louise for a way of making a contemplative space, a space for small ritual. And out of the talks that they had and Louise's own spirituality came this chapel, which is, the title of my paper is Radiant Livingness, because that is what Louise Nevelson thought that she was conveying with this chapel. The white, the gold, it's about joy and transcendence. And I think it's kind of a wonderful juxtaposition of having these paintings, which are about sorrow and losing hope, on the exterior walls of a chapel, which is about joy and hopefulness.
The connection between the two formally is gold.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing for Nevelson, because while she is monochromatic white, monochromatic black, she does use spray paint and in what she calls gold works. This is the only work where there is actual gold leaf. And these, Audrey, with gold, and what I'm curious about is what any of you see in the relationship of the gold here and the gold there, and perhaps also the gold of our hearts, which is what I think Pastor Khader, you were talking about too. We carry this hope in our heart.
Just a little, I'm a professional art historian, so gold in religious paintings is not a new idea.
It's everywhere. Sometimes too much.
So, and I do, but of course, every artist, every pope, every patron uses gold in different ways, and it's just it's wonderful, like I said, to have this juxtaposition of your work and Louise Nevelson's gold cross.
Audrey, this is a real art, so thank you, and it helped people feel again. This art, this Station of the Cross carry pain, yes, but also carry presence. It carry hope, and it carry also love. So you are able to touch the human heart here, and I love your art. This is a true, authentic, real art, especially the gold and the black. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So I am going to put a little mention in here. I know some of the people here are people that I know who may not know that behind us is this fabulous chapel, and that's what everybody's talking about. So definitely take a peek in there and see what's going on. So it's interesting, before I did this series, I can't really remember why I decided to do it on gold, and usually gold leaf is put on a harder surface, but I put this gold leaf on canvas, which is just not done, but I did it. And I always thought that in spiritual art, gold was about like the riches. I always thought it was something, to use the word, that this panel is about, something very material. But what I learned working with the gold is that it reflects light, and that's very much about, I think about faith, about ideas about religion. The sun is symbolic in so many different, early, later religions, and that whole idea of bringing light and opening up the mind. And it's something magical, because as you move around, the gold leaf part is alive. It changes. If you're wearing a red shirt and you're in front of the painting, that red shirt becomes a part of the image that you're looking at. And then the other thing I used, instead of the monochromatic white, I used the monochromatic black. And in these particular paintings, if anybody's a painter here, I used black gesso, which is basically acrylic paint, but it's acrylic paint that doesn't have much shine to it. It's a very dead, it's a very matte finish, and other paint will stick to it, so it's used as a base. And to me, that ended up having a very humble character. And I also did this, again, out of my head. I didn't have models or references, so it's almost like a silhouette, or it's done pretty much in silhouette, where it could be every man. It could be any person, and not very specific features. And I liked what you said, that reminder that Jesus was a Palestinian Jew, because he's usually depicted very much like almost Nordic, you know, very light. And that's just something that picked up, you know, throughout time. And I mean, frankly, someone like Michelangelo, it's very hard when you see someone with that kind of powerful image to kind of picture anything else. So.
I'm curious if we have any questions from, I have a few more, but before I ask my few questions, I thought we'd open it up to see if there are any questions from those gathered here, please.
I have
Amy.
an art historical question that you were answering part of already, but I'm just interested in this choice of the square and the scale. These are very intimate. The way I'm reading a kind of Baroque aspect to the way you're using the angles and pulling us across the canvas. Just wonder if you would talk a little bit more about some of the choices you made that ends up with what we're seeing here.
I'm not sure why I started small. I love painting big, but I think because it was an intimate subject, it might have just sort of come naturally to approach it in a more intimate way. And there was no pre-planning. Each station that I approached, I just tried to imagine what it would feel like, you know, what it would feel like, you know, the bent posture, you know, to be condemned, you know, the weight of the cross, you know, all of, you know, what you see here, that tender moment where people were bending towards each other. And it really was just kind of physically imagining what the human body would be like, what the position would be. And if I had really done research, it would have been a whole different thing. I would have been working on, you know, how the stones were cut and, you know, how the streets curved, but that wasn't really my interest in it so much. So partially similar to the idea of using the left hand, it was all about pushing something out intuitively that I didn't even know was there. And I sometimes refer to something in the left-handed work in particular, and because I also work very quickly, I want to kind of skip that idea of kind of perfecting and thinking about the feedback. You know, I just want to like tear through it. Things would come up, and I'll give an example. You can look a little bit closer where Jesus meets his mother over here. I doubt whether you can see it so far away, but it almost looks like rosary beads, which is kind of an ironic thing. I wasn't doing that. If I had tried to paint it with a teeny #1 brush, you know, they would have come out awkward and heavy-handed. But at the time, I didn't even realize it, but something in it looks right, and you just learn when to stop, and then later on, you can read it and see things that are happening. In the one where it's Jesus' head in his last dying breath, I didn't do that on purpose. There's like a dark spot below the mouth, and that's his last breath. And it's just, when I was painting it, it was there, and something in me, not consciously, decided to leave that smush there instead of cleaning it up with the wet paper towel in my right hand. And so the whole approach and the whole process was very intuitive.
Thank you.
Another question from folks gathered with us.
I'm not exactly sure who I'm asking this question of, but it's interesting to see two very modernist views of religious art. Obviously, you know, a lot of 15th century religious art, not so much 20th and 21st century. I know there's a very large Barnett Newman series of Stations of the Cross in Washington, D.C. Is the Stations of the Cross a subject that modern contemporary artists have wrestled with, or has it been sort of left behind?
David asked, is the Stations of the Cross something that modern artists often use? And I'm so to distinguish between modern artists who like have galleries and are part of the art scene. I think that Stations of the Cross is not often done. I think that there is a whole tons and tons of artists who are not well known in the art world, but who produce art all the time, and they do Stations of the Cross. So.
You know, I was born and raised Catholic. After the confirmation, that was it. I was done with the church, and I don't remember much about it, and I've come back 4 years ago. And I realized that in that interim, when it's no longer okay to beat your students, if you're in a Catholic school and they're teaching you, there's been major changes that I see going from church to church this time of year especially. And with the consciousness of pride going on in a lot of churches, even more so this month. And I'm seeing that the Stations of the Cross are, in every church that I've been to, which is quite a few, way bigger than they ever were years ago. When I was a child and I was going, they were shoved to the side. Now they're acted out in St. Paul the Apostle, my church of my parish. They do it over and over again. They do it in Spanish, they do it in English. And it's stunning how much in Catholic consciousness the Stations of the Cross are. I've never experienced anything like this in the past.
This resurgence of the presence of the stations, the practice of the stations, the spirituality of the stations. One thing that I've noticed, and we try to do here at St. Peter's, really established even before the chapel. The old church had an art gallery on the lower level of it, curated for a period of time, at least by Elaine de Kooning, was to really bring into dialogue with a traditional church in a way, then much more traditional looking. It was a neo-Gothic church, here a modernist building. But these traditions that were long thought dead, that are not, and that are in fact living. Unfortunately, St. Peter's was flooded a number of years ago. We have a number of icons. You know, that is a living tradition. People are writing icons all the time. And I think some of the most compelling new icons that are written are of characters actual people, actual events that maybe perhaps another generation would thought would never be touched. So they're deeply, it's a living practice. This livingness that Nevelson talked about, maybe that would bring us another level of this conversation, is to think about ongoing dialogue with ancient traditions, which I think, and we've experienced here in this conversation, certainly Nevelson would embrace fully. For our panelists, maybe perhaps each of you could field this question: and it need not be Christian, what sort of ancient spiritual tradition or ancient practice would you love to see modern artists engage with? We're planting some seeds here. There are artists around too. In the spirit of this, you know, these things that perhaps were thought dead, but we are alive, we are growing, we're human people wanting to interact, and part of it is interacting with ancient traditions. They need not be Christian. What would you like to see an artist take up as a subject or work with traditions that might have thought have been long dead, or underexplored, or underappreciated?
I can, this panel is kind of naturally focused on standard religious ritual, but I can tell you that contemporary artists are really interested in ecology, in the idea of portraying nature, the spiritual element of nature. I think that artists are always, maybe not so much visual artists, but dancers are portraying all kinds of human emotions that are a part of a spiritual, that connect with one's spirituality. So I'm kind of grasping here, and maybe I'll turn it over to the spiritual expert.
Actually, Audrey is the spiritual expert here because she's. I think the Bible is full of that stuff, you know, like, yeah, the Bible. I mean, I think modern artists, they need to read the Bible so they can connect the Bible and the art together. And I think we see it in the creation story. We see it, you know, in Jesus walking on water, or with his, you know, or with his disciple fishing in the Sea of Galilee. The Beatitudes, yeah. So the Bible is full of rich tradition, and I think how we can bring it alive through art, dance, you know. I think, yeah, that I would love to see more of that in our society. Yeah, and I think, yeah, the pictures you did, the Station of the Cross, are a living art, and it connect the human heart with each station. Yes.
I can't really say that there's something in particular that I think I want to see more of. I think that when art speaks to people, it's because it does express what's specific, and this is a specific story that's a time, you know, throughout time, same basic story, but that it also speaks to you in the contemporary. So again, the fact that you saw the analogy with what was going on in Palestine, you know, that's the purpose, and that's what we hope for as artists in our own work, or that I do. And you can look at it throughout Greek tragedies or Shakespeare, you know, or any art, you know, Michelangelo we brought up before, that lives. It's because it does express something about its time and some specificity, but that it also really touches the universal. So I think that's the best way I could answer, you know, what you brought up.
I'll be curious to see what you do next. I'm curious, Audrey, for you, as you were working on these, sort of it's a two-part question, because I think perhaps maybe they're interrelated. Did you depict these in order? That is to say, did you start at number one and go across, and then perhaps a semi-related question or a distinct question, depending on how you answer question one? Is there one that stumped you, that you literally stopped you in your tracks?
The answer to number one is yes, and the answer to number two is no.
Well, that was easy. Is there one that lingers with you? I'm always curious what lingers for artists.
I do have to say that Jesus being taken down from the cross, that arm really reaching up, and it was basically a drip of paint that became the forearm, and I didn't touch or change a single thing, and that kind of reach, you know, you can't. It's hard to even imagine what that must have been like.
To sort of dig into these a little bit more, which also may help us to dig in to Nevelson, and then I'm also curious for Pastor Khader to listen to this a little bit, because to dig in a little bit to gold, and there's a lot of gold in the chapels of the Via Dolorosa. Here, it's fascinating. The gold here is not the cross. The cross is black, And in the chapel, the cruciform shape is white. The corpus is white. The bars on the side are gold, but really you need the corpus to actually finish the cross. And we all have the benefit of seeing both of these. Having walked the Via Dolorosa and been to each of those chapels myself, I think of placement of gold in each of the chapels, often candles in front of them are sort of flickering. What I'm curious about is this gold. What does it mean? What does it evoke? What does it touch? What do you, in each of these works, and I realize that for many of us, if you haven't been to the Via Dolorosa, you might kind of imagine that, but Pastor Khader, perhaps you can bring us into it. We see your work, Audrey, and we see the chapel. What is this gold? What does it mean? What does it evoke?
Well, I mean, as you heard, I grew up in the Greek Orthodox Church, so like, gold is essential in the Greek Orthodox Church. So, but gold for us represent life, represent light, and a new life. And at the moment I walked to this space and I saw the gold in the background, I saw life in each station, even though each station represents suffering and humiliation and condemnation and rejection and carrying the cross and falling the first, the second, and the third time. But in each station I saw the gold, and that gold for me is light and life. So I see the juxtaposition between both ends. And it took me back to Jerusalem. It connected me back to the old city. I mean, we have the Station of the Cross in my parish, so we have them all year round. And on Good Friday, we do Station of the Cross because we cannot travel to Jerusalem, but we walk around the church. And I can tell you, like, people connect with each station, and they walk and they travel and they pray and we sing. Yeah. So, and we've been using St. Francis Assisi, Station of the Cross, liturgy. Yeah.
Karen or Audrey, this question of gold, what does it mean? What does it evoke?
Well, putting my art history nerdy factoid hat back on, Nevelson made two maquettes for this chapel. And from the first, one was always white, but the other model was, at first, gold. It was gold sculptures on gold walls. And apparently she didn't like this because at some very early point she painted over the gold, except for the crucifix portion of the model. And she painted it over a very dark blue. And so what she did was made a very dark, somber, mysterious space and a very white, light, transcendent space. And the pastor picked the white space. And Nevelson had used gold before in some of her works of art, and for her, it connoted glitz and wealth and kind of a materialism that was superficial. So I think this is just, I'm just kind of rattling off what I know, but I'm sure that here the gold is all about transcendent and the divine, because it's with the body of Christ. So.
Well, yes, I think that is, it kind of sums it up. As I said before, originally I had thought of gold, and I'd lie if I said why I used it. I just decided to use it when I was starting the series, and with the first couple who knew whether I was even going to continue with that, but something spoke to me once I was seeing it. There is a bit of a dialogue when you're creating between where you think you're going and what you're learning from what you're doing. So, as you said, and as I was thinking earlier, I always had thought of gold as very materialistic, and as you say, like superficial, or almost like icing on the cake. It's like decorative. But once I started, I really liked working with it, and in retrospect, looking at the finished pieces and looking at it as a series together, it kind of, that aliveness and that light emanating and going back and forth, because you are in dialogue when you're looking at the pieces, because there's movement as it reflects. It took on a completely different meaning, and I look at gold very differently now.
As we sort of come to the close of the panel, I think returning back to the subject matter, returning to the stations, to the journey itself, I'm curious if each of you could share, and it kind of relates to a question that maybe David, I think you asked, which is, are people doing this? And so to move us from our people doing it to why should people do it, I'm curious if each of you could, as a kind of a final question here, reflect on why you think it's important for artists to take up this subject, to take up the stations, to paint it, to sculpt it, to dance it, however. I'm curious the why. Why do you think that's so important? And maybe we'll end with Audrey, if we could begin with.
Thanks. This is a great question, because words are not enough. We need art. We need real art. And I think artists, they need to take the Station of the Cross and you draw them and connect with people, because the more you connect with people through art, the more the people can connect with the picture. And I always tell people in my congregation, when we walk from one station to another, we are not worshiping the station. We are remembering what happened to Jesus at each station. And I think to do it in a moderate way, it will connect with people, because you are speaking the language, the people language, through art. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm going to take a little bit of a contrarian view here. I think for many people, as you were saying, the Stations of the Cross are distasteful, a little bit dead. The actual literal, I too was raised Roman Catholic and was made to go do the Stations of the Cross on Good Friday, and I thought this was the most ridiculous, forcing anybody to have, to undergo grief and suffering when, they want to be out playing. It's just not going to work. So in the same way, I would never encourage an artist to take up a particular topic. They have to figure out what works for them, but they have to figure out what is meaningful for them. For sure, the story of the Stations of the Cross, as you have so eloquently explained, it resonates very much in our contemporary lives, and has throughout the history of Christianity. I just don't know artists. I wouldn't know how to tell an artist, go look at that story because it's important. Artists just need to do what they need to do. They need to figure it out for themselves.
So why did I even do the Stations of the Cross? There was something, as I said, small in my life that was about a betrayal, and it made me think about the Stations of the Cross. it was actually, I had seen a documentary, it might be Eyes on the Prize, I don't know, and I may not even be remembering it completely correctly, but it was one of those biopics about Martin Luther King, and we all know the story, or we think we know the story, and there was a little piece of it, and I don't even know whether they dwelled on it at the time, where as he was making progress, some of the people that he was working with kind of turned on him. And like that, what's that?
Similar story.
So you know, that kind of made it like palpable for me in a way, thinking about that. In retrospect, I can say more than in the inception, so I can't say this is why people should do it. But in retrospect, for me, it has connected me and opened up a lot of experience that I wouldn't have had before. I attempted something that's so much bigger than me, even though I did it on a small scale. This is such a huge piece of human history, you know, certainly Christian history. And I had an experience when I first exhibited them. Someone I knew, St. Boniface Oratory in Brooklyn, he was a parishioner there, and he arranged to show them because I had painted them, and you know, there they were, you know. And I learned that people were actually like walking the stations and doing their prayers, and it was a real emotional tiger by the tail for me. I hadn't really expected that. And that was when I embarked upon putting it into a book, because I realized that it was very intimate for people. And again, to use a word that's used too much in a cliched manner, it was humbling, you know, that what I had done without a great deal of pre-planning brought me to experiences that were so much bigger than me, because I attempted this important subject. And I learned a lot. So I guess if there's a lesson or something to suggest to other people, I guess it would be to, you know, if you have a feeling for something, even if it's not very specific and you don't know where you're going to get there, you know, take that journey. So
I always believe that you should end with a word of thanks. But before I end with a word of thanks, let me just say what's going to happen as we conclude the panel. We're going to the staff is going to very quickly like clear all of these chairs, because we're realizing, you know, we're right in front of all of this, and so that people have a clear environment in which to look at all of the stations. The chapel, the entrance to Nevelson Chapel is just around the corner here for those who would like to go and visit it. And then, because we always believe that it's not only gold that brings us life, in the church and in Judaism and Islam, being together brings life, and sharing some refreshment together brings life. So Jacqueline's already starting to pour things over there. So please help yourself. But so now that allows me to come now to how I believe you should always begin and end something, which is thanks. Thanks to all of you for being here, and thanks to our panelists. Thanks especially to Audrey for this extraordinary work.